Hi, good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for coming to our WebXam Users Workshop. My name is Kara North. I'm a member of the Assessment Services team here at CETE. We have a pretty jam-packed agenda today. You'll be hearing from multiple members of the CETE Assessment Services team. We do also have a live feed going on right now through YouTube. All that we ask is there are 4 sections, and that's represented on your agendas in front of you today. We just ask if you have any questions, if you could just kind of hold them until the end of each section. We'll have ample time for that. And ideally, if we can, we would like for you to use the microphone to speak the question, if it's at all possible. That way the folks online can also hear it. Our presenters will also repeat the question just to make sure that the folks online can hear it. But again, welcome. And without further ado, I'm going to turn the floor over to Dr. Jim Austin, who will get us started.
Kara, thank you. We're ready to go on the slides. Can everyone hear me?
Hi, everybody. Here you go, sir.
All right. Psychometry or psychometrics is my specialty, so I work in designing, developing, evaluating, and maintaining the testing system as the project manager. Bob Malman is the director of CETE and also provides psychometric expertise for the project. What are we going to do? Talk about a brief summary of design, develop, try out, deliver, maintain, and operate. A little bit about the development schedule for 2017 and 18, basically the IT career field. Talk about test types, make sure you understand the difference between the practice test, the post-test and pre-test, and the field test. Some of the feature ads we'll be talking about throughout this presentation from WebXam and our technical testing project. User administration recode rolled out for 2017 to 18. Added reporting by outcomes at the student level for pinpointing where instruction might need to change, not only at the class level, but at the individual learner level. Graduation requirements, looking towards spring, under transition rules for this year, 17-18. Talk a little about the data stream from WebXam to different stakeholders, including the ITCs, local education agencies or districts, pathway test scores, and all of that. WebXam news and calendar, staying up to date easily. Question and answer or follow-up inquiries, as Kara asked, if you could keep those to the end of my section, and you can always send them via email to me at austin.38. Always have a caveat here that policy questions and determinations are made by the ODE Office of Career Technical Education. Leah Amstutz and Emily Pasias are the leaders there. We'll have a short intermission and then hand off to other presenters, the real stars of WebXam. Where do the tests come from? Obviously, Ohio subject matter experts are the key. Everywhere you see a gold key there. Secondary high school instructors, post-secondary instructors, and business, industry, and labor practitioners have participated, from defining the body of knowledge, the career field technical content standards, which are undergoing broad revision this year and next. Create a test blueprint from that, write the items, review and set performance standards, conduct a field test and analysis, assemble the 2 test forms, pre-test and post-test, and then deliver and maintain the tests. Recruitment. Strategies are developed with field preferences plus Ohio Department of Education and Ohio Department of Higher Education input. Targeted communications to directors, supervisors, district test coordinators, and presentations like this one. The WebXam News, if you go to that website and look at item writing, you'll be able to see some of the career fields and expected schedule. If you express interest through that website registration, CETE updates ODE, invites to the workshop, 100% attendance is our goal. Again, the main career field for this year is information technology. There are 4 pathways, and we hear there's an emerging emphasis on cybersecurity, and you just have to look at the news of the last few months to see how important that is. We also have some short web videos that are used to orient prospective item writers, train on content, and thank the item writers. So, in terms of test design, this is where, since the transition to course-based pathways, we've been working on defining the test purpose. These are summative assessments of learning. They're not formative, they're not quizzes. They test the knowledge and skill from the course, post-course delivery, and that is the mandatory delivery that's required. Pretest is voluntary. These tests support federal and state reporting. They support articulation for some post-secondary courses where there's a C tag, and they can be used for program improvement at the local level. Content domain, by now I'm sure that folks know that the course outline is drawn from the career field technical content standards. A course consists of a subset of strands, outcomes, and competencies. There are post-secondary learning outcomes where defined. We draft a test blueprint for the item bank. This distributes items across the outcomes and ensures that key competencies are covered. We post them after field testing is over at the WebXam News site about the tests. Again, is your one-stop shop for this. So you see over here a representation of the career field technical content standards, or the body of knowledge, what you're expected to know and be able to do after instruction. Strand 1 is generic, strands 2 through whatever, and they usually go from 7 to 10 strands, is technical content. There are outcomes and competencies, so you get a hierarchical system. We get course outlines from ODE. The courses, we construct an end of course test for each of the course outlines, and we field test that. We develop the item banks. 4-option multiple choice is a very standard format for us. There are about 95 items in each end of course item bank. C2 items test higher level. We're calling that application, analysis, and evaluation from Bloom's taxonomy. We have scenarios for entry-level context, and learning outcomes are used when a CTAN exists and the linkage is provided. Facilitated face-to-face workshops with several small groups, 2 to 3 subject matter experts plus our facilitators. We store the items in our software tool. Items are edited by CETE staff. Graphics are rendered. The first part of QA is a large group review. It's facilitated by folks like Kara and other facilitators on staff. The goal is to ensure technical accuracy of the item. Is the keyed answer actually correct? Is there another correct answer? We need to modify it and make it wrong. Are formulas accurate? Is the C1 or C2, lower level and higher level classification accurate? And are the scenarios needed for providing an answer to the item? This is where we get the item bank in the best shape for item ratings, and that is part 2 of quality assurance. We make judgments on iPads. We want at least 10 subject matter experts to come in. Our new model is drop-by sessions held at CETE. We ask people to work through each item in a course, and for multiple courses, we ask them to rate the essentiality of the knowledge or skill that's in the item. Is it important information? We ask for a rating of item quality, talking about the scenario, STEM, options, and illustration. We ask for a recommendation for performance standards, proficient and advanced. Those are both passing, but proficient is a little bit lower than advanced performance on the test. This is another place for subject matter expert voice and input. Here's an example C1 item. These are taken from ag several years ago and were used in training. A question asking about first generation bioenergy feedstocks being problematic because of injected mixtures in hydraulic fracturing consist of, and a texture chart combines which parts of soil. And that leads me to a possibility on the next page of using a graphic like this, which is standard for soil, and asking some higher order questions on that. Just going back a little, this is the work that was accomplished last year. The career fields are listed, the question types are listed. Education and training was the major point of emphasis, and we finished 13 courses, one of which has an end of course test plus a portfolio for teaching professions, total of 1,250 items. We did repair and updating work for law and public safety, engineering, health sciences, and construction technologies with 2, 3, or 4 courses. Reason for law and public safety was we had only written foundations of firefighting several years ago and wanted to have a package of at least 4 courses, which seems to be a good minimum for any pathway, even a pathway that aims at industry certification and passing the state fire marshal or national registry tests. So in total, about 2,500 items were written. After that, we go into test tryout. This is part 3 of quality assurance. We had a large group review with our panel. We had a validation and standard setting drop-by ratings day. Part 3 uses all items that were approved at the workshop from the assessment matrix, which is the definitive source. You're supposed to give these post-instruction, or you can use optional pretests. The form is finalized in one of 2 ways. Plan A is a sufficient number of test takers, and we generally look at that as about 120 learners out in the field having taken the course. Plan B, when we have insufficient numbers, is a subject matter expert panel review of forms, and so far we have applied this to about 25 courses, including some that were persistently hard to finalize because of small numbers of programs or small numbers of test takers. I'm talking about aviation, some of the ag and medical bioscience type pathways. Again, we work for the Ohio Department of Education, so the policy guidance is the Career Technical Education Assessment Matrix, and you will notice that this year it is shifting its format pretty radically, posted in early August of 2017, and I believe that this is something that's going to be very important with the emerging graduation requirements. We conduct psychometric analyses, and that's why we close field testing early. We want to finalize the forms down to those 2 40-item sets. We want to rescore, and we use industry standard practices for evaluating the items, and that is how difficult is the item and how well does it differentiate between high and low scorers. We assemble the test forms. Again, we come up with 2 40-item forms, pre-test and a post-test. We are balancing content coverage of that blueprint, instructor ratings, and the psychometrics of the items. If we are looking at testing over years, I noticed too late to change it, but the 97,000 is 2 years ago, and what we had last year was 119,000 students tested, and I believe 242,000 tests delivered. So students take more than one test per year. Here is a sample posted blueprint. This is a course called Welding Technologies. You see an outcome name, and the percent of items in the bank that were approved by subject matter experts. That's the first thing we do in item writing. You see that strand 1 does cover about 25% of the test content. Materials joining, precision machining, and safety tools and equipment in strands 4, 6, and 7 cover the remaining 75%. So that is intended as a guide to instructors that were not at the table for item writing and for other stakeholders. The performance levels that we use, technical skill attainment is defined in 3 ordered categories, and they're used in reporting to federal and state government agencies. Non-proficient, N, means limited or novice with mastery not demonstrated at this time. Proficient, or P, means intermediate level and does indicate mastery at the point of testing. Advanced, or A, means the highest level above proficient mastery. Incomplete means there are too few tests for a pathway score, that is 1 or 2 tests, and this can sometimes be a point of confusion based on reporting to ODE. So we've done a number of things to try and enhance the website interface and the reporting that we provide. Some of the timelines for this school year, the pre-testing windows, again, for the voluntary pre-tests of 40 questions, we ran from August 15th to September 15th in the autumn window, and we delivered 41,000 plus pre-tests. The next window is January 2 to the 27th, which is the winter window. Notice that I should have 2018 there. There are usually fewer pre-tests delivered there, but some districts are offering 2 semesters or courses per year. Post-tests must be complete by late April 2018, and this is for reporting in ETPs. The field test forms window for the 80 to 100 item questions, it opens October 2nd. That was this past Monday, and it closes May 11th, but we're working with ODE to get the reporting done earlier for these new graduation requirements. I don't have anything specific, but that's on the radar here at ODE CTE and also at ODE EMIS. We might be sending out a survey about the last day of classes, but we've heard all through May are the last days for various districts around the state. Post-test forms window, or 40 questions, again opened October 2nd of 2017, and it'll close June 3rd. The data export, we are having discussions with ODE, and the participation and performance measures do use CETE output. Again, about the tests, at news, webexam.org is your best source of information, and as you see some of the features here, the standards link is right there, the test blueprints are right here, the tests are listed, the number of items, the performance standard, the advanced performance standard, whether it's in field testing or pre-test. And we now have over 400, I believe maybe 409 finalized forms. There are very few that are not finalized, just those that were in the item writing work for last year. The data paths for reporting, what is provided, the participation state level reporting. Participation is the number tested over the number taught. The numerator comes from CETE. The denominator comes from the district and ITC. And what is provided for performance reporting, the number and percentage of non-proficient, proficient, advanced, or incomplete. Non-proficient is failing. Both proficient and advanced are grouped into passing. And that's mainly what the federal government and the state report cards are focusing on. Some of the trends in Ohio's CTE testing that we draw on from scanning national sources in certification and occupational hiring testing. We're continuing to emphasize test security for score credibility. When we change procedures, the acceptable use policy changes at some login each year. We're trying to document exceptions where people call in and ask for a do-over or an unsubmit. This type of thing decreases score reliability or credibility for any purpose. Example might be a request to drop a large number of pretests where students have gone through most of the test. Is testing from home okay? No. This violates proctoring and district-owned device acceptable use policies. Another trend that we are advocating for is to increase the number of items on the forms, moving from 40 to 50 items for higher reliability, and to be able to include additional content. We would like also to develop collaborative relationships to validate interpretations of gain and growth for the OTES system. Crowdsourcing, teacher-written items are valuable for practice tests and eventually for secure end-of-course item banks if we can evaluate and confirm the quality. We want to, for interpretations of gain and growth, correlate self and peer ratings from teachers, observations, and student growth models in the distant future. We are requiring SSIDs this year for graduation reporting. I was just on a conversation between WebXam support and someone in the field where they were able to resolve that and find out that a person had 2 WebXam accounts. So the SSID gives us a lot of integrity for the data. Bulk uploads must contain this identifier, and CETE is coordinating with student information system providers, Dazzle or whatever it's become. Test preparation strategies. Laurie and Kathy talk about this extensively in teacher professional development sessions, but some of the ways that we've seen in discussion with folks at ODE as well as folks in the field, use the course outline. You can emphasize over and above the course outline. Course outline is a minimum standard. Try the pathway practice tests. I believe we have 25 available now, and we're getting ready to release those after they're reviewed. Obtain the blueprints when they're posted. I showed you a sample for welding technologies. And use the outcome level reporting, which Richard will speak more about later in another session. Use the class roster level for overall picture. Use the student level for pinpointing or targeting. Do we have questions in the room or from the field? Okay. I think people are always more interested in what follows than in what I do. So I'm going to have to live with that. Sir?
Can you talk a little bit about, historically, the system has given past final scores after 3 assessments. And now you have OD on the other side telling people you have to test either every course or you have to test 4 courses. So there's a lot of confusion. Historically, we've done what is required based on the system. And my superintendent's concern is that at some point, Emily might post hoc go back and say, well, you know, you didn't test every course, so we're going to change your report card.
A sign is being held up by our IT staff telling me to repeat that question. I'm going to paraphrase what was said there because that was a longer one than I can memorize. But basically, how many tests are required for a pathway test score? Is that going to change? ODE policy, I think the first thing is if you instruct in a course, you're supposed to post-test. So 3 tests has been common. The way we're reading Senate Bill 3 and moving forward, it's going to be 4 tests, or 4 courses, let me say, because sometimes a capstone course is used, and those generally do not have a test associated. But the way that legislation gets translated into guidance that districts, teachers, superintendents can use is through administrative rulemaking. So that's what ODE, we believe, is working on in terms of these graduation requirements. But the language did say 4 tests in Senate Bill 3, the way that we read that. So that is being worked out. We have typically calculated 3, but we average the total score on the top. That's what the student did. And we average in the denominator the performance standard. So it is a compensatory model. Student does really well on 2 courses in ground transportation, for example, and just misses on the 3rd. That student will generally get a passing pathway test score because they blew it out for 2 of the tests and scored well above the performance standard. That makes up for subpar performance, but near to the performance standard on the 3rd. If you teach more than 4 courses which have tests, you know, there is some possible danger there that a student could fail more of the tests. Another point that has come up recently is once you've taken the course once as a junior and don't pass, you're eligible to take it again the next year. I do not believe that there's any requirement to repeat the instruction. We would hope that the student is learning in other courses and thus able to perform better, undergoing the other learning experiences and does better the second year, but there's no requirement to teach again.
Right, strategically, what we've done is we've just tested every course the junior year so that they get the retest if needed.
Okay.
I mean, then it gives you baseline data.
Yes, and this gentleman was saying that they test on many of the courses in the junior year, teach and test, and that gives a fallback year during the senior year. Thank you. Anything else? Good. Test preparation?
I think if anyone needs to use the restroom or get a drink or whatever, feel Hello, test. Yeah, it's good.
Sorry about that. So we're going to go over some few items that we see as being phone support, questions that we get, and kind of go over a brief overview. The first question that we get is, I forgot my password. Previously, we were able to give that information to you or your administrator. That has changed. So when you go into the webexam.org, it'll take you to this screen, and if you do not know your password, you'll go forgot your password, hit reset. It'll ask you for your email. Put the email that's associated with your WebExam account, and you will get an email instruction on how to reset that. That'll give your username and allow you to reset your password. Once you do log in, again, Jim mentioned this, it's going to bring up some important resources for you. We currently are working on the user's guide. It's under construction, and we hope to have that up by the end of the month. It does include facts and quick links, and it's really helpful. The next one is about the test, and again, we'll go to that, and it shows you all the information on every test that's in our system. It has the helpful links to the ODE website for the course outlines and blueprints, and we'll just go over that briefly here in the next slide. The news and dates. You should be getting a quarterly newsletter if you're in the WebExam system. It also gives the WebExam calendar, item writing resources, scoring information. It's a really helpful link. It gives the newsletters, past newsletters, scoring information. So definitely, if you get a chance, take a look at the news and dates and the more information there. And most importantly is the support line. This gives our phone numbers. We are on a rollover line. The Kathy answers first, it'll ring to me, and then it'll ring to Angie. And then it also has our email address for support as well. We understand you have a classroom full of kids and you need to, have testing issues. Keep trying to get a hold of us. We're here to help you. If it's not a burning question or that you don't need an immediate response, we encourage you to do the WebExam email system. That'll create a ticket. Go into detail with that, and we will respond to you as well. Again, here is our WebExam calendar that can be found on the more information. And again, it reflects the important dates as to last day of testing, the pre-testing windows if you do the pre-testing, when the last date for uploads are. So it's very important to keep reference to that. And then about the test, that was that green button. Again, it shows all the course outline or course pathways here. And it's an easy search. You can click on those. It'll break down the pathways. Again, it'll show all the tests available. It'll show what's field testing. It'll show pre-testing. And that'll also give you a breakdown here as to how many questions. So if it has more than 40 questions, 95 questions, you know that it's going to be a field test. And also, if it isn't a field test mode, there are no pre-tests available if you are using the pre-testing system. Again, we reference the course outlines. The standards and course outlines are provided when we bring teachers in to do item writing. That's what these questions are based upon. So this is a quick link to the ODE website. So again, when you're planning your curriculum, please reference the standards and course outlines. And here is where the blueprints are available as well. Go ahead. They're not available for every pathway currently. As we're establishing those, they are being posted, but they are available. You just click on that and that'll bring up that information. Here are some frequently asked questions. So how do I see my student roster? So when you log in, it's going to give you a drop-down box here. You're going to go to your secondary students. You can pull up your list of students. Make sure at the bottom there's a show button. You want to make sure that all your students are reflected or the number of students. I think currently deflects to 10 students. Here you can edit your students manually. You can enable, disable. You can archive, unarchive. You can view your student passwords there. You can change grade levels and accommodations. You can view previous test results. You can add tests and teachers there. This is for individual students. And here too, you can add, when you go to add a student, you hit new. And here is an upload button that gives you a template so that you could provide the information if you do not have a coordinator that currently uploads your students. Here is an expand button, so we'll get to that. So when you want to see your student information now, all you hit click is this plus sign and it'll expand your student information. How do I make a lot of changes at once? We've changed this, that we added a bulk action. So once you have all your students shown, you would go to this bulk action, and this would, you choose the teacher, the location, the grade level, and it would bring up all your students. Here you can archive or do any of those functions through this bulk action. You would just select the students that you want to change and then hit apply to whatever action, and that will go ahead and that'll change your information on that. Here is, once you hit that plus sign to expand your student information, it'll break down, you know, their email, their grade level, if they have accommodations. And we'd like to emphasize it's important to, even if we do upload your accommodations for your students, as a teacher, double check to make sure they're there. Because once a student starts a course and their accommodations are not set, we can't go back and change it and say, oops. So the next course that they took, they can. But this is where you would change that information. And here at the bottom would show the test results. It shows what tests they've taken, the date, the performance standard, as well as their score. So it's just kind of a quick glance at an individual student's progress without going into the student or into the reporting system. This is also where you're going to make changes. And it's not reflected here, but there's an edit button at the bottom. So when you go to set their accommodations, you would hit edit, and then it would give you a drop-down button for the accommodations or whatever changes that you want to do. Make sure that you hit save. That's another button, and so that the changes are locked in. Again, how do we set accommodations? You would hit the edit button, choose your accommodation, and proceed with that. As you're aware, the accommodations, we do have text-to-speech. You have to pick a reader as required, and the supporting browsers are Chrome and Safari if you are using Macs, plus the newest version of Mozilla. IE does not support that platform. So when your students are logging in, make sure they're using the Chrome if they need the text-to-speech. And once they log in, then it'll be reflected. They'll have a little icon, and then it will read to the student. How do I access pretest? If you use the pretest, again, if your students have been assigned the correlating post-test or end-of-course test, the pretest will be available for you to activate. Now, this is the catch. You must have an appropriate number of credits assigned to you. Your administrators are the only ones that can order these pretests. There is a cost affiliated with those at $2 a test, and they must be assigned to you as a teacher. So when you go to activate these, if you don't have enough credits assigned to you, you will not be able to activate your students to take these pretests. And those must be done during the pre-testing windows. If you would run out of credits or not have enough, again, contact your administrator, or you could contact us and we could try to work with your administrator to get those reassigned to you so that you can test your students. They are rolled over, so if you don't use all of them, they are carried over to the following year unless your administrator decides to reassign them to somebody else. So they are available. A purchase order must be done to order those. They will become available immediately once your administrator has that purchase order and has those assigned to you. And you would go to, your administrator would go to order a new order for your tests. How do I activate a test? Again, here is our drop-down box. You would go to your activate test. As a teacher, it would default to you, and you would just follow the prompts. You'd hit the next, you would pick what type of test, if it's a pre-test, post-test, and then hit next. It asks for your pathway. then you'd hit next, and then the courses, as long as they've been assigned to the students' roster should become available. You'd select the test that you're currently going to activate, and then hit activate. We do have a new feature on this. You can pre-activate your students or pre-schedule your activation for your students. So you would pick the date and the time, and then it would automatically default to that, and you could activate the students. If they don't sign in and use it, it'll default back, and it'll just go, and you can activate as you would normally would. What is the time frame the length of time? 1 week?
Yeah, 1 week in advance, 1 hour window.
Okay, 1 week in advance, 1 hour window. That was a question that we got while we were on the road. So we have some what-if situations that we kind of go over, and I'll let Kathy take over with these.
What if you have an interruption in testing? You have a fire drill, or someone gets sick, or something happens at school. I want you to have your students simply close the window. They'll go into the safe test area. If they submit it, you're going to have to call us, and you're going to have to actually talk to ODE to get it unsubmitted. They'll stay in that safe test area until you activate them. I swear to you, they will still have all their time remaining. So you would just go into activate safe test, pull them up from there, and let them start again. As Lori touched on in getting ready for kids to test, I would definitely check to make sure the accommodations are there before you start. If you have a student that's been testing and you didn't set an accommodation, ODE is not very forgiving about that, so make sure that's done. Also on submit, make sure that when they're done, that they properly submit the test so that there is the test is not still open. If a student gets sick, or if you activated a test and the student isn't there, it'll time out after an hour. But if you have a student get sick or something happens, I want you to simply have the kids close the window at the X on the top of your screen. Do not have them submit. Okay? Any questions from anybody else? Okay.
And here is our number and the email address, so please don't hesitate. Again, here, for any questions, go ahead. Here's our phone number and our email address. Do not hesitate to contact us. We're here to help you and support you.
For those of you online, we're just going to take a quick break, and then we'll be starting again. My name is Brock Hertzfeld, and I'm going to be doing a walkthrough of the new WebXam system. I'm going to be covering a couple of the topics that were just covered by the ladies before me, but I'm going to try and go in a little bit more detail. So as many of you may know, WebXam was rewritten this year, so the interface has changed quite a lot, and we've tried to add a lot more features to make it more user-friendly for all the people out there in the field. This is the URL for the main website. All users will log in there, teachers, administrators, and students. Depending on what account they have, they will get into different sections of the website. So this is what the login currently looks like. You'll go there, you'll type in your account. If you have an account, it's going to be last name .number based, and then your password or your account would have been created by an administrator that's already at your school district. So if you're in need of an account, the first thing you'd want to do is find out who's in charge of WebXam testing at your school and ask them to create you an account. Once you have the account, there is a change from what we've done in the past where the account credentials could be distributed by the administrator that's at the local school district. We've changed that so that now the account gets created and the email address of the user gets added to the account. But that user will then need to go and reset their password so that only they have access to their password. And where that can be done is just below the login. It says forget your password and then it says reset. If you click on that, you'll be taken to a reset form where you'll enter in your school's email for you, and a password reset form will be sent to that email address where you can reset your password so that only you have those details. Once you log in, this is what it looks like. We're going to be covering a couple of the different sections that are crucial, and then I'm going to be walking down that menu on the left-hand side, going through all the different sections, just so you know what's there. The very first thing that we have is in the top right-hand corner, we have the support area. The user's guide, we're still actively developing that out, so there's not too much there, but soon, before the testing season really picks up, we'll try and have all the details to help users with the new system. The page that has been discussed a lot is the link is directly below there about the tests. This page, while you might not have seen it on other people's screens, it's very, very long. It has all of the tests that are in WebXam and all of the data about what's in that test. It has links to the standards that were used to develop that test, the number of items that are in the test, the scores that the student need to pass to be proficient, any advanced scores, and whether or not that test is in field testing. We also have the contact information there. As the lady said earlier, phone calls, if you're mission critical, you're trying to test, and you really need something done right away. If it's a longer term issue, like you need an account changed, you found duplicate student accounts, or something that is not timely, that doesn't need to be done, right now, it's best to fully detail what the issue is in an email and send it to webexam@osu.edu. If we have all the details in the email, we'll be able to resolve that issue right away and get back to you. It does go to our ticket system. That ticket system tracks every ticket uniquely. Any conversations that we have that goes back and forth will all be tracked so that any one of our staff members that has access to that ticket system will be able to help out. So you're not just dependent on one user. The next thing that we have is the user account. Here you can access my account information. If you want to update your email address, say your school district is changing to Google accounts, which a lot of school districts have been doing, and you need to update your email, this is where you'd go to do it. You can also update your password, and there is manage users. If you're an administrator, you may be over a lot of other users, and you need to manage how the school district's hierarchy of access is controlled. We generally recommend that only users that have had a little bit of training in that go in there and try and do anything. Usually, if you need people to have their access changed, I recommend that you contact us. Oftentimes, I'll call back and work with somebody to go over that to help rearrange who has access in their school district. And then there's just the log out button. The next thing, and I'm going down the menu on the left-hand side, it says user search there. This is the page, if you want to see the details on any individual student or other account, this is where you're going to go to search for and identify that account. So what we have across the top is filters. So in this particular instance, in the account that I'm in, if you look down at the bottom, it says that I'm showing 1 to 10 of 2,500 different accounts. So in order to narrow down what account you're looking for, you have the filters that are up at the top. There's first name, last name, and username. As you type in there, we've modified WebXam to automatically filter down on the fly as you type so that you're not having to enter something in, click go, like it was in the old system where you'd have to go step by step to try and filter down. So as you type, the list down below will automatically start filtering. And the fields are additive, so if you type in first name and last name, it will return less results than just typing in first name. And if you knew the username, that's oftentimes what you'd want to use directly. If you have the username, it's going to precisely match that student since there's a unique username per student. And then you'd only have a result set of 1 if it matched that account. Directly below the first name, last name, and username fields, there's account type and location. And I wanted to go ahead and show the account type search box because that's a little bit different. You're not just typing in some text and matching. In that case, you're able to choose what type of account you're searching for. So you may only want to see the results for students. You may only want to see the results for administrators. So you can go in and choose. When you click into that box, you'll have a drop down that allows you to choose which account type you're looking for. If you wanted to choose more than one account type, you can choose them and it'll start adding them in as little boxes into the text field. So in this case, I've gone in, I've clicked into the text box, it's shown me the account types that are available, and I've clicked on adult student, so it added that into the text box field, and secondary student. So this result set would only return adult students and secondary students. It's just a way of narrowing down to the accounts that you're looking at. Next to that's the location field. If you're high up in the organization and you have many different locations underneath you, you can use that to filter down to a school building if you'd like. The next thing that we've added here are the select options. So when you have many students and you want to perform an action on more than one student at a time, we've added the ability to check mark the ones that you actually want to perform an action on, and then you can trigger that action on them. So the very first box, the square that's up there in red, if you click that one, it'll select all the students that are visible at that time. So instead of having to click on each individual checkbox, you can do a bulk action where you click on that and it'll trigger all the students that are being shown to be selected. Or you can just go ahead and choose the checkbox next to each individual row and that'll only select those students. Then once you have the students that you want to perform an action on, there is the bulk action drop-down menu. The bulk action drop-down menu helped us to eliminate a lot of the pages that people had to used to go to get anything done in the old version of WebXam. Because now we can select the individual students that you want to perform an action on and then choose what the action is directly from one screen, it saves a lot of time. You're not having to go to special pages that only do an action, one particular action on that page. You're able to choose which actions you want to trigger all from one location without going to multiple pages. So here's a little zoom in of that drop-down menu. On this particular page, there aren't that many actions. There's a later page that we'll look at that has a lot more. But say if I had selected a couple students and I wanted to click download CSV, I would then click apply and I would get a CSV listing of the student data that's there. So if you wanted to say, get a couple of students and hand out their passwords, when you'd select those students, you'd click download, you'd get a CSV of just the students that you'd selected and their passwords. There's also the enable and disable option. When you do enable and disable, that is one of the two ways that you can control students' accounts. So enable and disable means whether or not the student is able to log in. When new student accounts are created, they're by default in a disabled state, so we don't want them to be able to log in until somebody at the school district has decided that those accounts should be enabled. Since you don't want to click in and do that for each individual student, this is a quick way of selecting all the students that you'd like to enable. So you'd select Enable Disable, and then another little menu to the right would pop in that would say, what would you like to do? Would you like to enable these students or disable them? And then you'd click the Apply button. Then that would change all of those student state from enabled to disabled or whatever you're trying to do. There's also the button for Show Passwords. So by default, we don't show the student passwords, but if you're prepping to get your students ready to log in and you need to get those passwords, you click that button and the page will then show you the passwords that they need. And if you choose to, you can download the CSV to have all that so you can manipulate it. You can create a mail merge to create little sheets or however you want to distribute those passwords to the students. Then there's the last button there, which is Show Archive. That's the second state that we have for students. There's Enable, Disable, and then there's Archive. Because we have a lot of accounts in the system, users will get kind of overwhelmed with how many accounts there are. And when you start graduating students, you don't want to see students that are no longer in your school district. So there's another form that we'll look at later that lets you say an account is archived. And what happens with archiving is that it just doesn't display those accounts in the main lists. So they're not kind of cluttering up your interface. So sometimes people will be looking for a student that graduated a couple years previous, and if they're not showing up, what you'd want to do is click Show Archive so that you're seeing the full list just in case they are archived. There is this little green button here. We're going to talk about that in a bit, but that's an important way to dive down into individual student information. I think I'll cover that in another slide later. Actually, it's this slide right here. So right there, for every row that we have for students or any account, there's a green button. When you click on that green button, the table row will expand and there'll be the kind of metadata about that account. Depending on what type of account it is, it'll have slightly different information. But you'll see the student's ID that you have entered in, the first name, the last name, if they have an email address on file, basically all the account details that we would have gotten in an upload or a new account creation, as well as just that student's tests that they've taken. And this becomes very handy if you're trying to determine why in your reporting, when you're seeing all the report data, why a couple students aren't showing up. So we'll often get phone calls that, I'm not seeing these kids, I really should be seeing them, why am I not seeing them? And one of the first questions that I'll ask the user that has this issue is, can you name one of the students that you should be seeing that you can't? And then I'll guide them through going and searching for that student, and we'll dive into that student's account and see what tests they took. And in many cases, I'm dealing with somebody who wasn't the teacher, but somebody who's just trying to review the tests, and they'll discover that the kids that they were told had been tested weren't. We don't have the data. So it's always a good way to double check if you're missing student accounts in reporting, to go look at one of the individual students and see if they really did do the test. And you'll have each individual test that they took, the score that they got, the cutoff score that they had to beat, those kind of details. So it's very, very handy using that green plus button. I'm just going to briefly cover this. The ladies before me covered it in more detail. If you're an administrator, this would be pertinent if you are the person in charge of buying the tests for your school district. There's 3 different tests that we charge for. There are pre-tests, which are $2 a piece, and there are 2 employability tests. The employability tests, I believe, are $9 a test. And they are if you want to have a certificate to give a student that they've met some basic employability skills. It's something that some school districts like to add, so the kids have a portfolio when they graduate that they can say, I've taken this test that shows that I'm a good candidate for employment, as well as here's the other CTE tests that I've taken. So if you're participating in the pre-testing happens twice a year, early fall, as soon as school districts open, that's the first test that we release, is all the pre-tests. I really recommend school districts paying attention to what they're doing with the pre-tests. I hear a lot of schools pre-testing after the kids have already had content given to them. Pretests are really designed to be given before the kid has had any material for the course. You want to find out the baseline of what the kid knows before they've been taught. And the reason I want to bring that up is if you teach them after that point, we do give a score back to the school district based on the teacher. So the pre-test and then how they did in the post-test. And if the student improved, that's the score that you're going to get back. How much improvement did the teacher have? And if you're teaching them after they've already had the material, that score is not going to be very high. And it's going to reflect on the teacher. So just be aware, don't use pre-tests as just a practice test. That's not what they're meant for. They do reflect back on the teacher that is giving the material. So the next piece here that I have is administrator. So there's a couple of the menus coming up that are all pretty much exactly the same. They're just a list that's filtered by the account type. So the very first one here is the administrator, and it has list and new. So list is just going to be a filtered list of only administrators. And then if you needed to create an administrator account, you can click on new. It'll have a form asking you the details for the administrator account that you would create. The teacher account, the assessor account, and the adult student are almost exactly like this. It's just a list filtered down to those account types and whether or not you'd like to create a new one. So I'm going to skip over those next couple of menus. And then we're down to the secondary student. This is where a lot of teachers and administrators spend most of their time. This is where the bulk of their students are going to be. And there's one additional menu that's in here. So you can list the student, you can create new students, and you can upload. The upload process is really important, and I encourage school districts to coordinate what they're doing with their upload process. There's some small schools that will manually enter in students. I personally recommend that if you're in a school district, trying to coordinate where an individual at the school district uses the upload tool. So if you have a student information system, a lot of the student information systems, specifically Dazzle, which I think the name has changed, but that's how we often refer to it, will export a file that WebExam can directly take in. So if you maintain your student information system, the data there, and it's accurate, it's going to be the most accurate way of passing a lot of student information into WebExam with no human error. If you're using the new option, it's only going to be one student at a time, and you're going to have to enter that data in, and there's a lot more chance for errors in keying in the information. So I do recommend that if you have more than just a few students, trying to coordinate your school district to do a bulk upload. And what happens with that, on the upload page, there's a download template. That template has some helpful hints about what data we're asking. And you can basically work on that data and verify that you have it all correct. You can take your time, review it, make sure the information's correct, and then it'll upload to us. We generally have a 5 business day turnaround time to get those accounts imported. But then we'll do that all in one pass. We'll take all the students, even if you have thousands of them. We will import them. If we find any data that seems to be amiss in the file that you've sent us, we will get back to you and say, it looks like some of this information looks a little wrong, and we'll help you try and fix that. So I really do encourage schools to think about how they're uploading their students to try and keep it as accurate as possible. So this is just a zoomed in view of what we were previously on, but it's looking at the bulk action menu again. This is the one that has the most bulk actions on all of our screens, because this is where a lot of people are working with their student accounts and performing operations on. So previously, again, you'd have to, in the old system, you'd have to jump from different page to different page to perform each one of these actions. Now, you can go in, select the students that you want to perform the action on, and then you can trigger the action. So some of the options are, maybe the student account doesn't have the test that you want to give, or maybe there's a couple students that you want to add the test. You can go ahead and select the students that you want to add a test to and go ahead and do that. This is the place where you would archive students. So for archiving students, I only recommend that students are archived if they have graduated and there is no chance they're going to come back and test. And this is a problem that we sometimes run into. Teachers think that archiving is to get rid of it from them. Students have more than one teacher on their account. So if one teacher decides to archive the kid, you've just hidden that kid from the other teachers. So I really, really recommend archiving should only be done when you know that kid has graduated and is no longer going to be testing in WebXam. To undo the archive, if somebody gets accidentally archived, you have the option to undo that. And then change grade. We do accept the kids' grades, the student's grade level in our upload forms, and it can be set if you individually upload students. We do not have any way of guaranteeing that the grade level is set accurately. So if your school district doesn't do a very good job of tracking that grade level, you might not want to try and do reporting based on the grade level. It's really dependent on how accurate your school district is on doing that. You can add teachers. So our upload form can accept the entry for what the teacher is. If the teacher account is already created in WebXam, if you send that information in the upload file, we will automatically add that teacher to the student account if they're not there. Otherwise, you may have to go in and add them manually if a teacher's not seeing the student that they should be seeing. You can also remove a teacher and download CSV. So the download CSV is if you want to get some of this data out of WebXam so that you can manipulate it. You need the passwords or anything like that. You can export this data. Enable and disable is the same exact thing that I spoke about before. It's whether or not the student can log in. So that menu right there really adds a lot of flexibility if you know about it and you understand what's there. It adds a lot more control over managing your students without having to do a lot of manual labor like it was in the old system. Here's a little screenshot of what it's like to manually enter in a new student. So the upload process has a window. Because we get really busy at the end of the year, we do cut off the upload. It's on the calendar, so that's news.webexam.org/calendar. We have all of the deadlines of when things need to be done. After the cutoff date, we will not accept bulk uploading of students. And at that point, you need to enter them in manually, which if you have a lot of students, I would recommend you try not to be in that position. So a lot of the data here, one important thing is that we've, over the last 2 years, switched to SSIDs, which was a change from what we used to do. The SSIDs allow us to be more accurate in the way that we report student data because it's unique per student across the state. And one of the reasons that we really wanted to move it to SSIDs is it helps us eliminate duplicate accounts. If you find that a student has a duplicate account, you're going to have to contact us, and we have to do a little sleuthing to figure out if that student is truly who the two accounts are the same student, and then if we need to merge them. And that gets tricky. So we want to try and eliminate that by having accurate data and accurate SSIDs on the student account. That is the main unique identifier for all of WebXam. Most of it's other common information, but there is the accommodation setting down there towards the bottom. That is very important to be set. As my coworkers earlier said, accommodations oftentimes don't get set in the upload because maybe your student information system doesn't have it. If the student has an accommodation, you may need to manually set that. And I'll show you later a little trick where you can double check before you test. But setting the accommodation before the tests get activated is important because once you've activated the test, if you don't have the accommodation set, we can't undo that. We can't easily undo that for you. So if a student starts a test and the accommodation wasn't there, and you discover that, this testing session's already started. ODE's recommendation is that there's not any changes after that, that you have to be cognizant of that setting that needs to be made. The next menu item is activate tests. So on the testing day, the teacher's going to come in, knows that they have a classroom of students they need to activate a test for. The very first thing that gets asked for is the teacher name. So with every test, we do tie that back to the teacher that's in the system so that we know who the teacher of record was for that test. The next option will be to select the test type that you're giving because we're going to filter down so we don't show you every test in the world. We want to figure out which ones you're actually trying to get. These menus will change throughout the year. Like this sample here was the screenshot was taken during when we had pretests open. So the pretests are shown as available. When pretests are not open, you would not see that option. So here I'm going to select a post-test, click the next button on the far right, and then it's going to go into the pathway. So if you're a teacher giving a test, most likely you're teaching all the same pathway students at the same time. So we're going to select what pathway we're interested in, and then it dives down to the individual courses. Once you've selected the course, we're going to be to the page where WebExam is going to filter out all students that don't have that test assigned to them. We will only show students that have the test that you're giving that day. So if a student's not showing up, one thing to look at is, do they have that test assigned to them? If they don't have that test assigned to them, you will not see this. So generally, you're going to have big, long lists of users down below. I've trimmed out all the extra users just to try and fit it into one screen. So we have 2 students here as an example down at the bottom. Starting at the top, we have an activation start time. This is where you're going to say when the test window is going to start. When is the first time that they can actually log in? In the current version, that's going to be a drop-down menu to expose the start and stop time. Here it's exposed so that you could see it. The change from the previous system is, on the day of the testing, the teacher always had to go in and activate the test. And then they had 1 hour window for the students to log in and start the test. We've changed this option this year so that you can schedule them out in the future. So let's say you want to test on a Tuesday. On Monday morning, you might want to get all the work done, but you can schedule the window to start Tuesday morning at 9 a.m. So you can get that work done ahead so there's less stress for the teacher. You can go up to a week in advance. The window of time, once that start time starts, you have 1 hour for the students to log in and start taking the test. And that window is primarily so that the test will expire so students can't go in later on in the day and see the test item. It's kind of a way of just protecting what the window of time students have access to see these tests. So down below we have the students that are appropriate for this testing session, and there is a little legend there. The legend is 2 little flags. It says extended time and reader is required. These 2 sample students do not have accommodations, but if they did, there would be a flag next to each one of those students. So before you start your testing session, I do recommend browsing down through your list of students, and if you know that you have students with accommodation, make sure that that flag is showing. If it's not showing, then they don't have the proper accommodation set, and you'd want to remedy that before you activate the test, or they will not get that option. So let's say I've gone through this. I checked marked next to the kids that I do want to activate the test for. We're going to go to the next screen, and success. The session has been scheduled for the students. The very first student was the one that I checked marked. So if you look on the far right-hand side, it says the activation window. This means that that window is scheduled for that student. The student down below that has just a little do not sign there. It means they don't have anything scheduled. So only you can filter out from the list of just the students that you're interested in scheduling. Scrolling down the page, so this is the same exact page, just scroll down a little bit so we can see it. There is a download activated CSV. And this was added by request to try and, if you only want the students that you're prepping to test, if you only want their details and their passwords, you can get that by clicking that button. So this, instead of going through the other lists earlier where you can get all that same information, this narrows it down to just the students that you're prepping to test in that session. So it makes it a lot easier to get the information that you need. Then in the bottom right-hand corner, there's an activate button. You'd click that, and you're good. So this is a sample screen of a student that's logged in and what they would see. Way back at the beginning, we had the login screen. That's where they would go, webexam.org. They would log in, and if they have tests that are scheduled, they would show up here. So here we have a sample of 3 different tests that are activated for this student. When they go in, they would click the test that they want to start, and then they would go directly into the test and start being able to test. On the left-hand side, there is a demo test button. if you click that, we have a short 10-item test that they can go in to just familiarize themselves with the system. It's also a really good way of telling the students to go in, take the demo test if you have an accommodation for things like the text-to-speech. Because we're relying on the browsers to do the text-to-speech for us, we're dependent on whether or not the user is using the correct browser or it's configured correctly. So I do recommend that if you're relying on text-to-speech that you might want to encourage the students to go in and do the demo test first. They can set the volume correctly. They can test out how the text-to-speech works. But that'll eliminate, basically they can troubleshoot any issues before they've actually activated the tests, the real tests, because when they go in there, there's not going to be any way to back out. So that was another option that we added not too long ago. This is just a little screenshot of kind of what the students see when they go in to take the test. This is one of the items on that demo test. So on the left-hand side, you have a progress bar just to indicate how far along the student is. And you have the little boxes that I just call the quick jump list. There's one for each individual item that they have. The color coding represents what the student did on that particular item. So in this case, 1, 2, and 3, which are shaded gray, have been answered by the student. Number 4 was seen but not answered. Number 5 was answered. And number 6, which might be hard to see, has a thicker border around it. That indicates the current question that you're on. A student can click on any one of those numbers to jump around if they choose to. Maybe somebody wants to just browse through things. But we do record every interaction that a student has with an item. If they saw it, we know that they saw that item. So we also will look at that. If somebody says there's a problem with the test, whatever else, we'll go in and look and see if the students actually just went in and browsed through the items. But it's also a good indication of they can go back and check the ones that they didn't answer to make sure that they don't accidentally skip anything. They'll basically just progress with the back and next. It does loop around, so with the 10 items, if they got to number 10 and they kept on clicking next, it would start back over at 1, and all their information would be marked. The top right-hand corner has a clock. That clock counts down. And if a student walks away from a test and leaves the browser window open, when that clock hits 0, it will automatically submit the test. We'll sometimes get comments from teachers that say that their student told them that their test just suddenly just disappeared. And often what that is the timer counted down and submitted the test because they didn't complete it in time. Some students who may be bothered by the clock, maybe they just don't like seeing a clock counting down. If you click the little stopwatch up there, it'll hide the clock for them so they don't have to be bothered by that. We do have a menu in yellow there that's a warning that says you have less than 10 minutes remaining. That will come on at 10 minutes to warn the student that they need to start progressing quicker, and it will every 5 minutes count down. So at 5 minutes, it'll start telling them they have 5 minutes remaining. When the student is ready to actually commit the test and submit it and get graded on it, there's the Submit Test button. The Submit Test button then has a pop-up that says, are you sure that you want to submit the test? So they need to submit twice. We'll often have students or teachers contact us saying that they have issues because they went in for the very first item, they click submit, and then they click submit again. And they don't know what happened. So you're going to want to encourage your students to pay attention and read everything. A lot of people get used to just clicking, something pops up, click it, whatever, not paying attention. We do have a warning message that says you're going to be scored if you hit this button a second time. That's kind of just a quick view of what the students will see on their side. This is basically back to the main page, and the last item in the menu is the reports. So there's a number of reports that are there, and Richard will be doing the presentation on that in just a moment. So I just wanted to show where that is at in the menu. I'm open for any questions that anybody has.
On data uploads, if I upload a junior 1 year, and on my bulk upload, I've got that same student in there as a senior, what happens?
So we look at the criteria that's in the upload file, and we will try and match. So we look at first name, last name. Most importantly, we look at the SSID, and we'll look at those in order to try and match in every upload file if there's a student that is currently in the system. Hopefully, if you've got your SSIDs entered incorrectly, it's a perfect match. We have no problems. There's no issues. When the match happens, any of the other fields that are entered into the data upload override or add on to the current settings in the system. So let's say the junior year, they have a teacher, they have the pathway that they're set, they have their first name, last name, all this data. That will all get loaded if it's a brand new student for the first time. All those settings are set. In the second year, if the upload has, maybe the name even changed, the first name is written differently or something like that, but the SSID matches, we will update the name with that current year's new stated way that they write their name. If a new teacher is added, that's an additive, so we'll add on that teacher to that student account. The old teacher will stay, and the new one will get added. There's information about the pathway. If the pathway changed in the upload, we would change that. So we take any data, once we've matched the student, we will update it to whatever the current year is. So if the grade level is changed in the upload file, we'll reflect that. That's what I was saying. If the school district tracks that very well, we will change that on the account. But it's really important to make sure that you have the data accurate, and then we will reflect it. If there is a collision where we're not quite sure, something looks like maybe a name changed and the ID doesn't look right, we try and check to see if there's anything that maybe is kind of a fuzzy match to what we already have in the system. And our upload tool will tell us, here's some issues that we have. And we will send an email back with those oddball ones that we don't know, we aren't quite sure what to do with, and we will ask the user who is uploading it, can you look into these and verify what settings are correct? And then once we have that data back, we will do the whole upload and all the students are in. Yes?
So if the student was already in last year for a pathway, they tests are already assigned to them, do you need to upload?
So the question there is if a student's been uploaded once, do you need to upload them again if nothing's really changed, if the pathway is already set? Technically, you wouldn't need to. I do kind of recommend thinking about it from the student information side. If you do have an accurate student information system and you're just going to dump out a bulk dump of all the student lists, there's no harm in having those students be uploaded again if there's no change. So if you concentrate on having the student information system accurate, and then you get the download file and you send that in to us again, there'll be no change, but you don't have to really go in and worry about, like, you don't have to exclude uploads. You did it in, you modified their settings in WebXam, or, okay. And you can do that. Anything, any setting that gets sent in through the upload file, you can go in and modify manually. I think that it can be helpful if you manage that in the student information system and then you pass it out of there and into us. But you kind of get a once a year thing with that. I wouldn't recommend just doing it over and over again. But if you have satellites that are, yep. So there's different ways of doing this. Just kind of have to figure out what system's the most accurate and best for you. And if you have any questions, you can reach out to us and we'll work with you to try and make it as easy as we can. Are there any other questions? Mm-hmm. 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 So the question is if it's early in the year and you're trying to pretest students and not all the students may stay in that school, how would you get students back out? We don't really remove students. We want to preserve all data. If a student is accurate and they're added into the system, we don't delete students. will archive students if they haven't done any testing, which basically just means the account's there, but nothing's happening with it. Nobody can log in. If the SSID is correct for the student and they left your school district and they went somewhere else, we'll be able to track that maybe they took a test somewhere else because we can relate it back to the SSID. To do pre-testing, there's a little bit of a burden on the school because we want to have pre-testing available as early as we can, but schools might not often have all of their data. And that's going to be an issue for the school district to find out, when do they want to create these uploads? When do they want to do it? If you have data that changes, you could re-upload or you could manually go in and edit the accounts. We can't do much to help there other than have the tools available for you to make any corrections that you need. If you have additional questions, you can reach out to us and we'll help you out there. Any other questions?
Okay, let's say I want to do my work ahead of time and I activate my students for 2 days ahead. Come that class time, 3 of the students didn't show up. What do I do now? What if, how can I deactivate them? Or if the test already starts, what do I do then?
With the testing activation, if kids don't show up and you've pre-activated, the testing session for them will expire. But that just means that after that testing session that you scheduled with them, that just goes away if they didn't test. And then you can reschedule them. So there's no real penalty if the kids didn't show up. Basically, you can let it expire. Or I believe if you go in and you go to assign the test, you can change that time and they'll override the previous activation time. Trying to verify, that is correct for just that one. So if you go in and for one student and you change the activation to a different testing time, that will override it for that particular student. But oftentimes it's usually easier to just let that day expire, because if they're not there that day, you're going to test them later in the week, the session will have expired and you can go ahead and just trigger it. There was some mention in the previous presentation about scheduled saved tests, and I just wanted to touch on that. So if a student does have an emergency, they're sick, or whatever else, you're going to want to close the browser window, and the main key thing there is it stops that clock that's counting down. If they don't close it, say there's a fire drill and all the kids get up and walk out of the building, all of their tests that are still open in the browser are still counting down and they are losing time. If you close the browser, it stops that clock. And we, on our end, will know that the student's no longer there answering test items. So we move it to a scheduled saved tests area, which just says this is an uncompleted test where we lost track of the student. We know what the answers were that they already answered. We know what time we last saw them answer an item. So then a teacher can go back in and reactivate that test. They can see only the scheduled save tests, the tests that were not finished. They can go in, reselect those students and activate it. And when those students log back in the second time, they will have all of the data of where they were, and we'll have the last time that we saw them answer a question, and we'll reset the clock to that. So that's what the scheduled save tests area is about.
All right, so we have a question from online. If a student changes schools, can we see the testing done while they were at the other school?
If a student changes schools and we know that we're going to move that student to your school because they are permanently at your school, when you view the student, you would see any tests that they took. So the tests follow the student, so you would be able to see what they did. There is sometimes kind of some confusion because some schools don't want other schools' testing scores to be on their kid once they get them. But that's not really what WebXam is designed to do. WebXam is not concerned about how your school district's report cards look. It is concerned about whether the student passed the CTE pathway, which means did they take the courses and did they score above proficient. So while sometimes we might kind of get drawn into this kid studied here, but we don't like those scores, that's not what we're about. We attach the tests to the student, and those tests travel with them. and whether or not they pass the pathway is dependent on how the student performed, no matter where they went to school. Any other questions? I went a little bit quicker than I thought, so we can probably take a 5-minute break. I'm sure when we open it up at the end, there might be a lot of questions, and sometimes we can go almost all day. So I think we'll take 5 minutes, and then my colleague Richard will be covering the new reporting that we have available in WebXam. So 5 minutes.
Are you guys ready to move on to the exciting world of WebExam reports? This is the fun stuff. You know, we've done all the testing. Well, we've made the students do all the testing. We've added all the students in, and now it's time to look at our results. Clearly the most exciting part. So my name is Richard Huggins. I'm going to be going through the WebExam reports with you, and we're going to have a lot of fun. Probably not. We're probably not going to have fun. But first, before we get into reports, I do want to talk. Jim kind of stole my thunder about how pathway scores are calculated, but I'm going to do it again anyway because it's worth repeating. And if you guys see Jim, let him know that I did it better. So pathway scores are calculated if a student has taken the requisite number of end of course tests to receive a pathway score, which is generally 3. As there was a question earlier about whether it was 3 or 4. We begin calculating that pathway score at 3 tests. And that's just in case you have a capstone that's part of your course. Obviously, those might not have a WebExam test, so we start calculating at 3. How are those calculations done? So we add up the percentage score on each test, and we add up the benchmark for proficiency on each test, and then we look and see which one is bigger. And it's pretty simple. So if they have a higher percentage of questions answered correctly than the proficiency benchmark, then they are passed. If they have a lower number, then they have not passed. If they have the exact same number somehow, they got exactly right, they pass. So it's greater than or equal to. Let's take a quick peek at an example. So we just have a student who's taken 4 tests. You can see on those 4 tests, they scored 50%, 40%, 55%, and 60% on those tests. For simplicity's sake, the proficiency performance standard on each test is 50%. So if we add up their scores, we say they total up to 205. If we add up the proficiency standards, they add up to 200. So voila, the student passed. And what you may notice here is that on one of those tests, this is something that Jim mentioned, they did not pass. They got a 40, which is not passing. But as Jim said, there's a compensatory model. So because they did well on the other tests, they end up passing the entire pathway. So in order to sort of pass CTE pathway, you don't need to pass all the courses. You just need to, as a whole, achieve the proficiency standard. Okay? Okay, so I guess I reiterate that point here. I also want to reiterate that 2 students in the same pathway, if they take different courses, of course, those standards are going to be different. So you might have 2 students, both of whom scored 75%, but because they took different tests, which have different standards, one of them might pass and the other one might not. So just keep an eye out for that and know that that's what's going on, that they probably just took different tests. And as I was saying, or as Jim also said, if a student scored not proficient on one course, they can still be proficient in the pathway if the other test scores are sufficiently high. And lastly, of course, and again, Jim said this again, stealing my thunder, pathway calculations, we can do test retakes. So once a student has received the instruction, they can take the end of course test every school year after that. So if you have a student that tests as a sophomore and they do not so well, then they test again as a junior, and they can even test again as a senior. And we use the highest score, not the last score. So if a student got a little bit of senioritis their senior year and didn't do as well on that test, we're going to use that junior score that's higher. So there's no risk in retaking those tests. The student can only achieve a higher grade. All right, that is my brief diversion into pathway scoring. Now we're on to the WebExam reports. As you have seen throughout, and I assume all of you have been using WebExam every day, right? Every week. WebExam has been redesigned. It looks significantly different than it did last year, and that includes the reports. And what you'll notice with the reports is that the design of the reports is exactly or very similar across all the reports, but then also across the rest of the site. So all those lists look roughly similar. They operate roughly similarly. So for you, it should be easier to sort of move and to navigate the site without having to on reports, I need to click this button, but over here, I click this button. You don't have to worry about that. It all should work the same. We also have an improved details view where applicable. So on every report, I think on most reports, there's a green plus like you saw on the student lists. You can click that for more detail. And we'll sort of go through that when we're looking at the reports themselves. We have improved data export options. So there's a direct to Excel export now, which even bolds the column headers for you, which is really, I think, my biggest accomplishment is getting those headers to bold correctly. Yeah, we've improved the speed in most cases. Some reports, particularly for some of the older pathways and some of the aggregate reports as well, tend to take a little longer to run still. So if you are doing a report on like something from 2015, 16, or a year before that or whatever, maybe start the report, go grab yourself a cup of coffee, chat with your neighbor, come back. Hopefully it will be done by then and you can look at those results. So just be aware that some of the older reports still take a little longer to run than I would like, and we are working to improve that. And then lastly, you can also now search within the reports themselves. So if you do a report for your entire planning district, you get 8,000 students who have taken agribusiness or whatever, you can just start typing in the student's name that you're looking for, and it will filter immediately down to that student so you can immediately see what's going on. And there's more to come. We're making changes all the time, and we very much need your feedback. So if there's something in the reports that you want to see, please drop us a ticket, ask a question in this seminar, put up semaphore flags, whatever you need to do. Let us know what you need. We're here to serve you. We're here to make these reports work for you. Let's get started. There are a lot of reports. So we're going to go through each one by one. I'm just going to list them out here. There's the summary report, and that sort of gives you a broad overview of what's going on in your area. The end of year export, which really serves as a way for you to sort of preview what we would be reporting to your ITC to make sure it looks correct. Then we get into the teacher effectiveness report, which if your school uses our pre-testing system, you can use that teacher effectiveness report to see how your teachers are doing in their student gain calculations, which again we'll get into. You have the individual report, which is probably the report that's most often used. It lets you, by teacher or by administrator, look either by pathway or by test at student results. The expanded report is exclusively for pathways and is sort of an offshoot of the individual report. It just sort of gives you everything on one screen to see how students are doing in a particular pathway. The aggregate report gives you a chance to see how your students as a whole are doing and to compare that against statewide averages, which is always exciting. The outcome report, which is new as of last year, gives you a chance to see how your students are doing against specific standards that the tests cover. And new this year, you can drill that down by students. So you can see, okay, this student didn't answer questions related to this standard very well, so I need to do some remediation over the course of the year. And again, we'll cover all of that. Lastly is the portfolio report. Are there any people who administer 16 MC? 16 MC/MD. So you perhaps would be familiar with the portfolio report. It's specific for that pathway, which is early childhood and teaching professions. Teaching professions, it gives you it's a mechanism by which student portfolios are judged and those scores are entered in the WebXam. That, of course, is changing this year, that portfolio. The new portfolio is not up yet. It will be soon. And then this report will probably slightly change to reflect the new portfolio. All right, let's get started with the summary report. So as I said, it gives administrators and teachers sort of an overview of what testing has occurred and where applicable, how many students have passed those tests. So it's available to teachers and administrators. And again, its use is, it's just really, we want to use it to verify testing has occurred. Particularly if you're an administrator, you might want to make sure that your teachers gave their test to all of their students. Just make sure that that actually occurred. And that's what this report is for. And new this year, you can filter that report by month. So if you only want to look at what happened in September, you can just filter down to that month specifically and see what happened. So here's what the data entry screen looks like. You're just choosing a month if you wish and a year. And then when you run that report, these are the results that you see. So it lists for each teacher/test, there's a row. So you can see that Aiden Columbiana, my fake teacher, administered test 01, 01, 05, whatever, to 67 students, and 38 of them passed. Now, if you see pretests in this list, those won't list the number passed because there's no passing of a pretest. So that'll just have an NA in that column for pretests. But again, this is just to allow you to sort of get an overview of what's going on. New this year, mostly new this year, is the end of year export report, which gives you as administrators a chance to see what data would look like if we were to report to the state today for the current year. And again, the idea here, what you want to be looking for is to verify, you want to verify student pathways, make sure that they're in the correct pathway, and you want to use this to sort of check for duplicate student accounts. So if you have a student who you would have expected to have taken 4 tests, and you look at this screen and it's only showing 2 tests, then there could be a duplicate account, there could be something else going on. You might need to mark that down and drill into it a little bit later. So this report really gives the opportunity to sort of catch problems before they get too far down the road. So the screen looks similar to the other one, except instead of filtering by month, you can filter by location. So if you're at a CTPD and you want to look at what's happening in a particular school, provided those students' location is set correctly, you can filter down to the school and only see the report for that location. Otherwise, you can just leave that blank and see everybody. And this is what that report looks like. What you'll notice for a particular student, the first row you see for a student is how they're doing in their specific pathway. And then for each row below that, for that same student, it's the end of course test scores that they got. So up until this year, when we've reported out data to your ITCs, we've only reported that pathway score. We said, this student on this pathway achieved this result. So in the top row there, that student, that APNI that Jim covered a little bit earlier, so P is proficient. So Amira Adams passed as proficient, although that's not correct. My screenshot is not correct. This should say an I here because they only took 2 courses in the pathway, so that should be an I. I apologize. So pretend that's an I. It's all right. And then down here, you see each test that the student gave. So starting this year with ITCs, we're reporting not just that pathway, but also all the tests that student has taken. Yes? So the question is that total over all the years or just this year? So for the pathway score, it's cumulative across all of the years. But for the courses, it's only going to be the ones that were scored in that current year. So sort of a split answer there. Yes?
You don't need a pathway though. If you have students that had additional tests, are those going to show up on that export?
So the question is, if there are additional tests that the student took outside of the pathway, for example, perhaps they took an FCS course, but they're normally an agribusiness student, that FCS course will show up as well. So it includes all of the tests, not just the ones in the pathway. So again, those will all be listed here so you can review them in advance, make corrections as we go so we're not creating a situation where we're going to go back to your ITC and go to ODE and get things corrected. We're trying to sort of help you catch those things in advance. Okay, the next report on the list is the teacher effectiveness report. As I said, if you use the pretest system, this report will be available to you. And this gives you, either as an administrator or as a teacher, a chance to see how your students improved as a result of your instruction or your teacher's instruction. again, a fairly simple form here. We're just asking for the year. This is, as an administrator, you'll see all teachers. So we can see that the top row here is the first teacher is Isa Allen, who gave 95 tests. You can see the pre-test percentage and the post-test percentage, and then there's a gain calculation. So on average, that teacher's students gained 7 percentage points as a result of their instruction. And then we have a little textual description of that level. In this case, that's most effective. Jim may have mentioned, and I think we'll have newsletters coming out about this, that level, that text level, is set by you by completing a survey that Jim is sending out. So please take that survey. We can only sort of change those levels if we get a lot of responses, so we have a statistically significant sample to draw on. So if you think that gaining 7 isn't most effective, it's just moderately effective, then this is a way for you to let us know that that level is out of whack. So you can click on the green plus over on the far side and get detail. So I have done this for this third teacher here, this No Auglaze. And you can see for every student now what their gain was on a particular test. So this is a lot of information. You can see every student's gain. And you'll notice down at the bottom, you can export just those details out. So just for that teacher, you can export that out and you can send it to them and say, hey, look, your students all gained a lot, or some of your students gained some, however you want to do it. Or you can go back and at the top, there's those export options, and that'll export the entire sort of list as needed. As I said, if you choose the Excel option, you get my cool bolded headers, which have I mentioned that before? Okay. There's also a PDF export if you're just sending these out to people. There's a new PDF export that gives you kind of a nice view that you can easily share with people as needed. Okay. The individual report is sort of the meat of the WebXam reporting system. It's available to administrators and to teachers as well. It really is about where you can go first to start viewing student performance. And new this year, so last year there was a detailed view on this report, but it only showed the students' tests within the pathway that they were assigned, but now it shows all of their test scores. And also new this year, administrators only can choose to show the student's SSID instead of the name on this report. And the purpose here is to allow you to more easily import that data into your student systems. So instead of having to try to match up names, which sometimes change, now you can run this report, get the SSIDs, and just import those. And as Jim mentioned, that now that there's some graduation requirements associated with CTE tests, it's important that those SSIDs be in there. So you can also use this report as a way to verify that all of your students' SSIDs are in there, because we'll only show valid SSIDs in those lists. So you can see, oh, there's a blank there. Oh, I need to go and get that student's SSID and enter it into the system. I'm not sure if I have a slide with the SSID. Let's find out. So this form is a little more complicated. You can optionally choose a location if you're at a high level and you want to see all the test results from a given location. You can specify the location. You can specify a particular teacher. It's a little bit of a misnomer because it could be an administrator as well. And if you run that against an administrator, it shows all of the results for all the teachers underneath them. That's important to keep in mind. You don't have to go through teacher by teacher and output those reports. You can just run it for you and see all the teachers underneath you. You can select a test. Another little misnomer, it could be a test or a pathway. So you can either choose like an individual test, or you can choose the whole bank. And the results look slightly different, and we'll sort of go into that in a second. You can choose to filter by grade level. You can choose to filter by year. You can choose whether or not to include or exclude archived students. That exclude archive is different than it was last year. It's switched. It used to be that automatically it would show archived students to you. We changed that this year so that by default it's not going to show you those archived students. So if you're running a report for a couple years ago, you'll just want to make sure to include those archived students. Otherwise, you'll get a blank report and you'll wonder, there are probably more students tested than 0. The likely situation is that you just need to check to not exclude those archived students. And lastly is that new column called the report identifier. You can choose to whether to show the name or to show the SSID. So when you run that report with a name being shown, this is what you see for a pathway. And so you'll notice for each student, it lists their location, the pathway, 45 MC in this case, what the performance standard is for the tests they have taken in that pathway, how many of the tests they've taken, how many of the questions on those tests they got correct, and then some percentages. I think for the end of course tests and for the newer pathways over the past few years, those percentages so far and overall are always going to be the same. Those used to differ slightly for the older modular pathways, but for the end of course ones, they're generally always going to be the same, so you can pretend that there's only one thing there. And then whether or not they're passing the pathway is the last column. You'll notice since none of these students have taken the 3 courses, they're all listed as NA for passing. So you can click on a student and drill down again using that green plus over on the side, and you can see all of the tests that student has taken. You'll notice the first column is used, and that indicates whether or not that test is used as part of calculating their pathway score. So you notice this student took 2 post-tests and 2 pre-tests. Obviously the pre-tests aren't used in calculating a pathway score, but the 2 post-tests are. And so then you can see their individual results on each one of those tests right there. And again, down at the bottom, you can export out that individual view for that student if you wish to. Okay, let's take a look for a test now instead of a pathway. So just an individual test. Again, you'll notice this screen looks slightly different than it did for a pathway. Again, you'll see the name or SSID if you choose that option. You'll see the location, what test we're reporting on, the performance standards for that test. You get both the proficient and advanced performance standard, the percentage of questions that student answered correctly on that test, as well as the raw numbers, and then the passing, and whether or not they pass and whether or not they pass with an advanced level of proficiency. So in this case, notice the first few students did not pass, but the third student did pass. However, they didn't pass with an advanced level of proficiency. I seem to recall this test is fairly difficult, so that these results are not particularly surprising. A 50% pass rate, that sounds about right for this test. And again, for an individual student, you can drill down just as with the pathway and see all of the tests they have taken. Because we're not doing a pathway report here, we don't show that used column. So you can't see that which tests are used for calculating their pathway score. You only see that when you're doing a report on a pathway. I'm just going to stop right now and see if there's any questions. Is anything? Yes, Lisa.
That end of year export,
Yes.
no, that doesn't have the SSID.
That is correct. The end of year report does not currently include the SSID. When we do report out here ITC, that SSID is included, and I think we're looking at adding that currently. And it sounds, based on your question, it sounds like that's something that you would want. Oh.
For what I need to work on this one.
Oh.
But I can get it with, I'd have to, since it's, I
Yeah.
have to do each path, if I do the pathway report on the individual, that you were just showing that, and if I show the SSID, I'll get all of that.
Yeah, and so the question is, because the SSID is not currently showing up on the end of your export report, if I needed to get that data right away, yes, you could use the individual report by pathway to get the data that you need. And I will, like I said, I want to add that to the end of your export. We just haven't gotten around to that yet, but we will do it. Perhaps not in time for you. I apologize.
As long as it's on the radar.
It's on, oh yes, on the radar. Any other questions? Brock, do you have a question?
I just wanted to add that the end of year export is not what would be used to report back to EMIS. That goes through a different channel. It is just a view to review.
That's what I was going to use it for, was to make sure I have my students that I'm pulling out of student information all have that test.
To reiterate what was said, she's just using it as a comparison, but I just wanted to make sure that we were all aware that if you are using the end of year report, that is not what gets used officially. We go through a different channel to report that data.
Thank you. Yes, Tina. Not, yeah, I mean, really, so the question is there a report that lets me see for every student, every test, basically? And the answer is that end of year export can really serve that purpose for you, because it's going to have for every student their pathway as well as each test that they took. So that can meet your needs, I think. Excellent. But yeah, the end of year export, so it kind of has this extra function, and it's really the only place where you can sort of see all of the students regardless of pathway, as well as all the tests that they have taken. And something to keep an eye out with the reporting is that you might run a report and not see a student that you expect to see. And there could be reasons for that. It could be that the data is not correct. It could be that there's duplicate accounts. And one thing that you can do is go back to those student lists that Brock showed you, expand that student out, look at their test results, and make sure that those tests are actually showing up correctly. So that's just a quick way for you to do a little sanity check to make sure that the correct data is showing up in both places. And then if it's not showing up, send us a ticket, webexam@osu.edu, and we will be glad to help. I look forward to the report questions that I get asked. So, so we're going to move on to the expanded report, unless there are additional questions. No? All right, let's talk about the expanded report then. So last year, the expanded report was sort of built into the individual report. There's a little checkbox in the corner of the screen where you could say, show me the expanded options. And we decided to break that out into its own separate report because we think it's really useful for you to have. So what it will do is, given a chosen pathway, it will show you each student's score in that pathway, as well as all the tests in that pathway that they have taken. So you can just quickly go through for a given pathway and see how students are doing. It's also a great way to sort of check and see, oh, this student needs to retest here. This student didn't pass this test last year, so if I give them again, they do better, they might increase their chances of passing the pathway overall. Let's take a quick peek at what that report looks like. This form is similar to the form for the individual report. Again, that exclude archived. I want to cover that again because that changed from last year. Make sure if you're reporting on previous years that you change that exclude archived to no. So we're going to do this for ground transportation, this report. So in my sort of test data set, there are 2 students in that program. You can see the first student has taken 2 tests in the pathway, and it lists that they are currently passing the pathway, but the passed overall is NA because they have not yet taken enough tests. So the top row that's shaded gray is sort of their pathway score, and then the rows underneath that are a lighter shade, I guess they're actually white, are their individual test scores. So you can sort of see the math right here. You can see that so 2 tests. The student answered 39 correct on one test, 33 correct on another one, so they've answered 72 correct on the pathways so far. And so far they're passing, and if they take their 3rd test and they do well enough, then they'll be passing the pathway and life will be good. And we can all go home. The second student, however, has only taken 1 test. Notice they didn't do as well. They didn't meet the proficiency standard. So currently they're not passing the pathway based on that single test. So you'll either need to retest them next year or make sure they do exceptionally well on the rest of their tests. So this is a nice way to get a view of how that data, what is necessary to make sure your students are passing as much as possible. Okay, now we're going to move on to the aggregate report. And again, this gives you a chance to sort of view your overall class performance as well as compare those results statewide. So let's take a peek. There's not too many changes for this report this year. Again, the report is awfully similar. There is a type at the bottom. If you have adult students as well as secondary students that you're teaching, you can choose to filter by that in that location. I don't know if there's too much adult testing going on, but if there is, that's a way for you to filter by those down to those particular students. So when you run this report, you get both your scores as well as the statewide scores. And this again is a slight change from last year. Last year you'd have to run the report for yourself, then go back, run the report for the state, and then compare them in like an Excel or something like that. Now we just present those both to you right here to make life hopefully as easy as possible. So you can see from my demonstration data set, I'm reporting on the entire state, so the numbers are exactly the same. It's unlikely that's going to be the case for you. It's unlikely that your performance, your max score, your average scores are going to be the same as the state's overall. They'll probably be slightly different, hopefully. So that just gives you a sense for your class of how they are doing overall. Now to the outcome report. The outcome report is probably different than most of the other reports in that it doesn't sort of tell you how a student did on an entire test. It's really about how they're doing on those standards that make up the test. So you can use this a couple ways. You might use this to evaluate your teachers based on those performance standards. So you might say, hey, you're doing really good on all of these standards. Your instruction for these standards might need some additional work. You can also, especially if you use the pretest system, you can administer the pretest, then look at these results, see where your students did well and where they did poorly, and then tailor some instruction or do some formative assessment necessary to get those students up to speed with those standards. And as we said, new this year, you can view for each student how they did on questions related to the standards. Let's take a quick peek at that report. Again, you notice these forms are all the same. They're very similar. It's all good. You can choose the options of location, teacher, test, and year, just like everywhere else. And when you run that report, this is what you see. So listing down are the standards that are on this particular test. Which test did I choose? The Energy Systems Management test, an exciting field of study. So you can see all the outcomes on that test that are hot. You can see how your students did as a whole on the side there, and then you can see the statewide average immediately. So you can immediately see that this teacher, in most cases, is pretty close to the statewide average, but maybe that 1.3 about business ethics, they need maybe have an additional lesson plan about that standard to bring up those scores. And again, if you click on that plus, now you see the individual students, and you see over on the side here how many of the items related to that standard that student answered correctly. Now you'll notice that these are 40 question tests and we're covering 10 to 12 standards. There might not always be a lot of questions that the student answered per standard. So it's important not to sort of overanalyze this data. In this case, it looks like there's maybe only 2 questions related to this standard on this test. And you can tell that because the range of scores is either 0, 50%, or 100%. So you probably don't want to take too much out of this. You want to say, well, maybe there's some areas for these students where I need to do some improvement, but it's only 2 questions. Let's not lose our minds here. So just to quickly cover that caveat about the outcome reports, sometimes there isn't a whole lot of data per student, per standard there. And now we'll move on to the portfolio reports. So again, for those of you who teach in the 14 TP, I said that wrong earlier, didn't I? 14 TP or 14 MD students in the teaching professions pathway. This gives you a chance to see how your students did on their portfolios. So again, you can use this to verify if a third assessor is needed. So for those of you who are unfamiliar with the portfolio system, if the two assessors judge a portfolio, if their scores are divergent enough, then a third assessor is needed to sort of make sure that we're getting the right results. And then you can also review the assessor's comments. Let's take a peek. Again, the same form as always. And then here's what the report looks like. So we can see for the top student here, Susan Morgan, how we can see how assessor 1 scored it, how assessor 2 scored it. And in their case, they needed a third assessor. And we can sort of see how that third assessor scored them and whether or not they ended up passing that portfolio. In this case, every student passed the portfolio. So as long as they pass their web exam tests as well, starting this year, then they will have passed the pathway. And you can drill down by student and sort of see their total score, as well as on each section of the portfolio how they did. And then below there would be any comments that the assessors left. In this case, they didn't leave any. They let the numbers do the talking. That's all I got. Do I have any more questions? Man, I must have done a really good job on that. Excellent. Are you sure? It's your last chance. What I said about tickets earlier, I'm not going to answer tickets about reporting. No, I'm kidding. Yes, Leanne.
I may be crossing into 2 areas, but when do those field testing scores get pulled into the student's data?
Yeah, so the question is, thank you, Michael. For those of you who can't see, Michael is reminding me to repeat the question. And the question was, so having administered the field tests, when do those tests get finalized and the student scores get entered into the system? So that generally happens obviously at the end of the year. We end the field testing window a little early to give us time to sort of figure out which questions are the questions that should go on the post-test, which questions should go on the pre-test. And then we do all of that, if possible, by the time we report out to the ITCs. In some cases where not enough students have taken those tests for us to have a good sample, that might stretch in to the summer or even into next year. And if you have a field test like that, where we didn't have results by the end of the year, we'll re-report those students' results at the end of the next year to make sure that we report to the state how the student did. But we do everything we can, and obviously now with the graduation requirements even more so, to make sure that all those field tests are finalized by the time you report to the ITCs and then off to the states. So I guess the answer to your question is late May.
That leads me to another question.
Yes.
Is there a particular reason that the file has to go to the ITC and not just to the school?
No, other than that's the policy that was passed down to us from ODE. And that may, we are working with ODE on sort of revamping how we do that reporting. So some of that may change. We might end up reporting directly to ODE and then ODE working with you, as well as reporting out to your ITC. Those things could happen. And once we know for sure, we'll let you guys know that that's going on. But yeah, I think for reporting directly to schools, yeah, it's probably best just to work with your ITC to get that data. Yes, Michael.
Yeah, so we have a question from online. During student uploads, do we look in the archive student accounts for possible student matches?
Yeah. So the answer to that question is yes. We do look through those archived students to see if there's a match. And again, that's going to be about if the SSIDs are the same, then even if they're archived, we'll still at least present ourselves with the option of connecting those accounts together. I guess that's that one. Any more? Yes. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, and so the question is, I'm going to paraphrase, so if I get it wrong, just let me know. You're at a satellite school. You want to look at all the students at all of you're going to look at your satellite schools and figure out which students have taken enough tests to be a concentrator in a specific area. And I don't know that I have a really good answer for you there. Probably the end of year export is the best way to go for that. So then you can just sort of pull out all the students at once, maybe do some Excel magic and sort of figure out which students have scored which well enough and which pathways to get them assigned correctly. So probably the end of year export is the best option for you. Okay?
I have a question.
Yes, sir.
I'm delving to EMIS, and I want to stay as far away from that as I possibly can, because I don't understand what they do, or God bless those people. But here's the question.
EMIS, if you're listening, we're not talking about you.
That's right, exactly. We have an EMIS coordinator. She wants to check for tomorrow reporting that the scores that we received from the ITC look like what we did for last year. And on a quick glance, on the two different, but end of year looks a heck of a lot better than it did in the past, thank you, to now, I see students that aren't there, the reports aren't matching. So if I had a student who was a senior last year, graduated, but did not take a web exam in 2016-17 school year because they passed it as juniors, they met the pathway score. When you report, there was a disconnect on somebody's report. Is that common? And am I making sense?
To me, you're making sense. I'll tell you what, I'll repeat the question and we'll see if it makes sense to everybody. So again, I think it's a valid point. The question is, if I get the file from my ITC and I compare what we reported to RTC with what's showing up in the report, and there's students that are showing up in one report but not in the other, why is that? And is that a common occurrence? And specifically, if a student didn't test last year, which reports are they going to show up in and how is it going to work, basically? It is a hot mess, indeed. But basically, we're only going to report a student if they tested in the given year. And so that is true both for the ITC report and for that end of year export. Is that, okay, thank you. Yeah, so generally speaking, there shouldn't be a huge number of discrepancies between the ITC report and the one you see for the end of year export for last year. What can happen, however, is if we've merged accounts in the meantime, like say we've discovered over the summer that there's accounts that need merged, that might be reflected in the end of year report on WebExam, but obviously wouldn't be in the ITC file necessarily. Do you have anything you want to add to that, Michael?
Not too much. Really the only point to illustrate is that end of year export report is literally the exact same code that we're going to run when we do it to ODE. So those two should be 100% the same. It'll just be a snapshot. We're going to take that report a certain day and send it off.
Yeah. So if you are seeing differences, first off, there was a bug in the end of year export report until earlier this week, and you saw it when I presented, embarrassingly. That the results looked a little different than they should have. So there was a bug up until, I think we fixed that on Wednesday. So if you did those reports before Wednesday, you might want to run them again to make sure the data is correct. And if you're still seeing discrepancies, please drop us a line and we'll get it figured out. Thank you. Anything else? I mean, we have a half an hour. So, Kara, do you want me to juggle? Is that okay? No, we'll end the session. I want to thank you all very much for coming, both here and online. Those of you who are online, it was a pleasure to read your comments, and I hope we got all your questions answered. If you have additional questions, again, send us a ticket. We'll also be monitoring those comments for a little while here, so if something pops up, just go ahead and put it on there, and we'll try to answer it. Thank you very much. Have a safe drive home.